Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. 630,000 convicts are released from prison each year in the United States. Half of them are black. Some struggle to reform, some succeed, some don't. Greg Donaldson, associate professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, tells the story of one of these men, Kevin Davis, in his new book, ZebraTown, the true story of a black ex-con and a white single mother in small-town America. Greg is also the author of Ville, Cops and Kids in Urban America, which the Los Angeles Times called, quote, smart, noble, and potentially restorative. Greg's written for Sports Illustrated, Playboy, the New York Times, New York Magazine, among others. I first met Greg a dozen years ago in a project for the NYPD and spent many hours in police stations and patrol cars with him. Greg, congratulations. Welcome.
Nice to be here, Doug.
It's a great book. It is indeed grim, poignant, and illuminating, and a deeply and unflinching portrait. Excellent, excellent. Lots of levels of meaning. Talk about ZebraTown. Very interesting place. One of these places that most of us don't know about.
Interestingly, the people that live in that very city don't even know about it.
City of Elmira.
I just came back from Elmira. We were doing a book signing in the Barnes & Noble there, and some of the local people said, you know, where are all these interracial couples? And I said, well, there's one right there, and there's one right there, and there's one over there. And people started doing double takes, and sure enough, it's all around them, yeah.
Well, what is all around them? What does the term ZebraTown mean to them as they use it, the residents?
Well, the residents of this neighborhood use it. The residents of the larger city were unaware, as I just said. It just refers to the interracial, the black men and white women. It's mostly that. It's not the other way around. Refers to that. And I think somewhat, I use the title somewhat ironically because, of course, mixed race couples are not, it's not stripes of a different color. They're actually human beings and their children are beautiful. And so the term ZebraTown is a little bit startling and shocking. And that's the term that they use, just to refer to interracial couples.
Just looking at the book, I mean, the cover art is really pretty fabulous. You've got obviously a black man and a very white woman with their lips nearly touching. Why? I mean, and the cover art in this particular book really matches the substance of the book. How did you choose the cover art?
Well, I didn't. They showed me that, and that was Scribner's came up with that, and I thought it was just a beautiful picture. It's a beautiful, touching moment between two people, and it's left it at that. It's gorgeous.
What does it say about the character? Does it speak to Kevin Davis and Karen Transky?
In a way it does, because people assume things about relationships from the outside. They assume when they see an interracial relationship that he's after this and she's after that, and that they all have agendas. People project on them, when in fact this relationship was quite tender, as is the picture, quite loving, and
but at the same time quite violent.
Yes.
Okay. Rather unusual origins of this book. Describe how this book came about.
I wrote a book in 1993, I believe it came out, Ville, about a neighborhood, 2 square miles in Brooklyn, Brownsville. Fascinating neighborhood, storied, historied neighborhood that is troubled now. It's 17 city housing projects in 2 square miles, wonderful, hardworking people, but also high crime rate. And I did a panorama of the neighborhood, a young cop, a high school kid, a teacher, a principal, and I tried to give the fabric of the neighborhood. And while I was about to come out, they showed me a picture for the cover of the book that was a woman with a child by the hand in front of a row of blasted buildings. And I said, I don't like that picture. I think that it shows defeat. It doesn't show what I want to show, which is the explosive potential of the young people in Brownsville. And so I went out to take a picture on the street myself with a photographer, and we walked up to a group of young men standing underneath a flagpole, and we said, can we take
This is at Tilden Houses?
Tilden Houses.
Go ahead.
And I said, can we take your picture? And they said, no. As a matter of fact, you better back up on out of here before somebody gets hurt.
Oh.
And as we backed up, a car backfired in the street, and they all turned to it. And as they did, the photographer dropped to one knee and banged out the picture that appears on the cover of the Ville. I thought it was perfect. And when it came out, detectives in the public service area, PSA 2, the housing police took a look at that, and they said, we want him, and we want him for murder. We want him for the Amboy homicide.
This is Kevin Davis with the New York Yankee cap.
They used the book as a wanted poster. It was on Daily News. The book has neighborhood covered. It was publicized, and they caught up with Kevin, and he beat the murder case. He was not convicted of murder. He was convicted of aggravated weapons possession. He did 8 years in prison, and when he came out, he came looking for me.
Talk about that. I mean, when he comes looking for you, what's the purpose of him looking for you?
Well, he had sent me a series of emails before, and on those emails, he seemed like a reasonable person. And when I saw him, he did say he was a reasonable person. And so,
was he a reasonable person?
yes, he is a reasonable person. When I did the Ville, I had access to all kinds of people. The principal let me into the high school. People let me into their families. It was fascinating. But there was one kind of individual that I did not have access to. It was the really bad guys, the tough guys, the thugs. There was a guy named Boo Bear, another guy named Born Son, and there was Kevin Davis. And these young men were zero tolerance for disrespect. They were engaged in illegal activities, and they didn't want to talk to me at all.
And these are the real gangsters. These aren't the, the MTV gangsters. These are thugs.
Well, that's a term you can use for them. Yeah, they're thugs. They engaged in illegal activities, and they carry weapons and use them.
And are violent in other ways as well.
Theirs is a world, not the entire neighborhood, but theirs is a world of violence in which you establish your dominance through violence, and it's not something they made up. It's very American in a way.
Right, okay. So you meet Kevin Davis in 2002. Where do you meet him? What does he say? And why do you write the book?
He walked into the bar here on 8th Avenue, and he walked back to me, and he sat down, and I was a little concerned. And he said to me, if I throw this glass of water on you, are you going to start to sizzle? And I said, excuse me? And he said, are you going to start to sizzle? And I couldn't understand what he was saying. And I said, you think I'm wired, Kevin? You think I'm going to record your conversation? I'm a reporter. I have a pen right here. I'm going to write down everything you say. So he said, then who's that? And he pointed next to me, and there was a tall, gray-haired man, looked just like me, and he had a wire running out his shirt up into his ear. And I said, Kevin, I have no idea who that is. And so that was a little bit of a rough moment, but we got past it. And he told me of his idea to move out of New York, not to return to New York, not to stay in New York because he was in New York, but to go up to Elmira and to reinvent himself, to re-establish himself in another town, in another place, and pursue the American dream in a peaceful place on the very street he could see outside the cell window of the prison he was in.
Unbelievable. Now, how does he convince you to write ZebraTown?
Yeah, the word convince is not really the right word. I mean,
How do you come to write it?
He told me of this story, and I said, as you mentioned in your lead-in, that there are so many men coming out of prison. There are so many black men coming out. They talk about the area of segregation, then integration. Well, some have referred to the last few decades as the era of incarceration. And now we're dealing with some of the or have continually so, but now the offshoot of that. What is going to happen with these men as they return back into society? And I thought that would be a worthwhile story to tell. Not only that, but I thought Kevin Davis, young people across the country don't want to be like you and me, by and large. They want to be gangsters. They talk about, oh, that's so G, that's gangster. They don't say, oh, that's so P, that's professor. They wear the baggy clothes
You're kidding.
that Kevin and his ilk wore to conceal guns on the street. They use the language that comes out of prison. They use the language that comes from the streets and the prison. The rap industry, gangster rap industry, is $1 billion industry.
What's the attraction?
The attraction is that this is unadulterated manhood. Kevin doesn't go to work, and you'll see some scenes in the book when he gets a job as a road manager for a rapper, and then someone disrespects him. He ends that disrespect quickly.
And violently.
And violently, as would John Wayne, as would our American heroes. He's the new American cowboy because he's unadulterated manhood. He is not attached to society in ways that make him have to compromise. And so he becomes very attractive to young people because of that.
Okay, it's unadulterated manhood looked at through a certain lens. Of course. And we all look through it after these lenses. Now, he carries the Ville around with him during his entire sentence. Why? Why does he have your book?
Because most of his friends didn't read the book. And even though he's not in the book, he's on the cover. And they assume that there was a book written about him.
Also, this is props. This is part of his reputation that he is so bad that he's on the cover of a noted book.
Props.
It's all
proper
props.
Respect.
Okay. Now, talk about how you actually wrote the book. I mean, you spent literally, 6 years on this book, and you talk about your relationship to them, this sort of immersion journalism, both its strengths and its pitfalls and its problems, all of that.
Well, the strength of it, of course, is that you get access that you wouldn't get as a magazine reporter, as a newspaper reporter who comes and goes. I essentially become part of the lives of the people who are written about. I'm part of the family. I'm sitting at the dinner table. I'm helping the children with their homework. I'm in the middle of family arguments and family spats. I become a touchboard. His girlfriend would say, "You can lie to the writer, but you can't lie to me." I was part of the arguments as they would go through.
Now, how does that frame or distort or move the story and perhaps indirect, or do you become invisible?
No, you don't never become invisible. It does frame and distort the story somewhat because if you get really close, you begin to have some influence on the story. I would talk to Kevin all the time about and he would talk to me because he's not a person who takes counsel. He's a alpha male. He's a person who likes to be in control, and so we would talk back and forth.
And that must have been interesting with you and him, knowing you.
We would have discussions about those kinds of things, and so you become part of the story. You have an effect on it. It has an effect on you, being around Kevin for all those years and being around the family for all those years. And sometimes you want to try to help the family. Sometimes you're concerned about their privacy. I remember telling Kevin one time on his behavior, I said, "Kevin, you're ruining the book."
But what did you mean?
Well, he was doing things that I think Kevin is a fascinating character. Individually, he's smart, he's creative, he's intelligent, but he has internal contradictions and difficulties that make it difficult for him to succeed in America as it's set up. He has external difficulties. He can't get a job. He's viewed differently because he's not only a black male, he's a dark-skinned black male with a prison record. And
his rap sheet is huge and serious.
Right, but he also has these internal contradictions. So I thought, he's a fascinating character. But when he began to behave in ways that I didn't think were so fascinating, I would tell him.
What's interesting is, given your access and your involvement, as you just talked about it, that you're never in the story at all. There's never, you get this third person omniscience where it's almost like you're writing fiction and that you're not there. So I guess you succeeded in your goal of not being there?
I've toyed with the idea of having myself in the narrative, but it distorts the narrative too much. It's not about me. It's not about a journalist. It's not about a person who has a interest and understanding and a feel for the world that Kevin comes from. Because I do. I've been around his world for a long time. I started teaching in Bedford-Stuyvesant during the Vietnam War.
You taught in the prisons?
Yeah, I've taught in prisons. I'm very close to some of my students that I had way back in the 70s. I've developed relationships. So I know his world as well as an outsider can know it. And so that adds to the book as well.
Now, not only do you talk to the two main characters, Kevin Davis and Karen Transky, who we'll get to in a moment, you also talk to policemen, judges, family members. I mean, talk about the labor that went into this, both intellectual and physical.
Well, first of all, Kevin's credibility is an issue. So if Kevin is going to tell you a story, you have to make sure that that story is true. So Kevin began by telling me stories of his prison exploits, and exploits they were. He was a prison leader. He started a small riot in Attica. He would stand up for issues. He was one of the original Bloods in Rikers Island. And so I had to get a hold of Kevin's prison records, 456 pages of incidents in which Kevin not only were they not shown to be what Kevin said they were Kevin's rendition of them was actually understated. Kevin is a credible source, and so I would talk to arresting officers who told me what happened to him when they arrested him. He was a gentleman about it. He did say that, yes, that was him on the book. And so it was police officers who I've worked with over the years many times. Up in Elmira, they were very, very accommodating and helped me out. I talked to a judge up there who was involved in a lot of Kevin's cases, and family members, and the story starts to expand as you go through. So you basically live it.
Do you like Kevin?
Yes. Yeah, I like him.
What is it that you like, and what is it about him that made you call him a thug's thug in the book?
Well, he's, I don't want to be overly praising Kevin, because Kevin has serious issues.
Yeah, you're really pretty non-judgmental here, and that's one of the strengths of the book that I don't know. That's why I asked you the question. How do you feel about him? Because I couldn't figure it out.
Well, it's mixed. Kevin believes in, he's very charming. He's has a big heart. When I drive back from Elmira, he's on the phone asking me, the roads were slippery, I'm worried about you and stuff. So Kevin has a good heart, but also Kevin believes in controlling situations, in the family situation. And I would shake my head many times as he would make mistake after mistake. And he believes in intimidation. And we've had issues with that between us.
I would think so. I mean, here's a guy who impregnates women and moves on. He beats women. He creates and comes from unstable, fluid families. You talked about the internal and the external. Talk about the external constraints that these 630,000 released prisoners face, and particularly black cons like Kevin.
Well, all cons face collateral punishment that goes along with their sentence when they get out. They have trouble getting jobs, of course, but there are actually laws against them receiving certain kinds of student loans, living in certain kinds of housing, adopting children, voting in some ways. And so Kevin faces all those things, especially the employment, because there's a company called Kennedy Valve in Elmira, and it's run by McQueen Industries, one of the most dangerous places to work that you can imagine, with a series of
Unbelievable.
And Kevin can't even get a job in there. He's knocking on the door to hell, and he can't get in. These huge furnaces are burning, people are getting hurt, and they won't let Kevin in.
And then this goes over months and months and months of applications.
Right, months, years. And he can't get in there, they won't hire him, so he ends up working for basically minimum wage. He doesn't mind working. He actually enjoys it. It's like a sport to him. He works out on his lunch break, and then he's a good worker. And they praise him. He worked at Rhinone, the bathtub countertop factory, and he's working in another factory now there, and he works hard.
But after he does it, he gets tired of it and moves on. It's almost like there's almost a cultural ADD here.
That is true, that he doesn't see work as that kind of a job, as a lifetime employment. But would you? Would I? He told me one thing about one of the factories he worked in, and he had lost his job because of an altercation with a woman who called him a racial epithet. And I was try to get it back. And he said, take a big whiff of what you smell. You're in there now? I called him on a cell phone. I got the job back, Kevin. I said, yeah. He said, you smell that? I said, yeah. He said, what do you think that is? I said, I don't know. It smells like chemicals. He said, yeah, you breathe that in for the next few years and see how you feel. I'd rather not. So he makes some good decisions. On the other hand, internally,
go ahead.
The idea that his idea of what a good father, a good husband, a good family member is, in some ways they're good. He helps the children. He loves his children, but the consistency, the emotional stability, the relationship, the respectful relationship between the two leaders, heads of the family, him and Karen Tansky. He can't manage that.
And ultimately, he goes to jail for physically assaulting her.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about her, both as a character and, if you will, and it's an unfortunate term, almost like a symbol. I mean, talk to her as a unique individual and sort of symptomatic of what?
Well, when Kevin moved up to Elmira, he thought he was moving to paradise, but actually he was moving to the Rust Belt. He was moving to an area in which a huge percentage of the employable young people have moved away in the last few decades. And the people that are left in a very difficult economic situation, and Karen Tansky represents that demographic. And so she, in that area, has very few, has a very limited future as well. Her employment, her education, her cultural collateral is low.
Okay, but she graduates high school, goes on to business school, so she's post-high school educated, so she's not what you would think of as your traditional Appalachian, in fact, and because you're in that range, literally. Right. She's different, but is she?
Well, as I said, she's a intelligent young woman with a post-high school education, with no prospects. Even the jobs she gets with that education are not much better than the jobs that Kevin was getting. Very, very low pay.
What's the attraction?
That's what everyone wants to know. It's funny how this always boils back down to race. People, when you talk about the book, it's about economics, it's about a love story, but it comes down to race. And people always ask, and I was interested myself, I said, well, what do you see in Kevin? What are you doing with a muscle-bound ex-convict? And her answer was, I love him. Her reasoning was, and it's
stated
in the book, the father of her child was a ne'er-do-well.
Her first child.
Yeah, her first child, right. Her was a ne'er-do-well, a person you couldn't depend on, a person who was a substance abuser in some ways. And so Kevin isn't. Kevin is a person who is not a substance abuser. He doesn't drink. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't take drugs. He does what he says he's going to do. He's a person who commands respect. He's not a ne'er-do-well by any sense. And he represents physical health. Kevin was in prison doing 1,000 push-ups a day. So he looks good. He does what he says he's going to do. And he is, in Karen's eyes, the kind of man that she was attracted to.
Yeah, but he cheats and he beats her. What makes you stay in the relationship? Lack of alternative? Or just this thing called love, which is inexplicable and in some senses knows no quote-unquote rationality?
I think the cheating thing, she got used to, but she wasn't going to get used to the physical abuse. And that's what leads to, there's some fascinating scenes, because I was around for a little bit of it, and then break it down moment to moment, exactly how these moments occurred. I think it's a good insight into domestic violence and how Kevin feels as if he's being disrespected.
Yeah.
And because he doesn't make enough money to really help the household, so therefore he has no say in the household, which rankles him and pushes him to the edge. And then he believes in standing up for himself physically. And so if he stood up for himself on the street and he stood up for himself in prison, it's a natural jump for him to stand up for himself physically in the household.
Wow. He gets he's out of jail. The serving time for the physical assault on Karen. Have you seen him? He gets out of jail, I guess, last spring, April of 2010. Yes. Mm-hmm. Have you seen him? Spoken to him?
Yes.
What's the follow-up? What's the epilogue to the book? Is there an epilogue?
Well, he's with Joy. He's with another of his girlfriends who has 2 children by him.
Right. And
he's working in the factory, and he's doing his best to support that family with some rough moments there as well. But he's growing somewhat. But whether or not he can make the transition to being a father and a husband and successfully, past history would say no.
What has been the reaction to the book among critics? You've done book signings, you've talked to friends, all kinds of people I'm sure have communicated with you. What's been the reaction or reactions?
Well, I wrote the Ville, as you said. And the the Ville was acclaimed. It got very good reviews all across the country.
Excellent work.
In some ways, because I was writing about underdogs, the high school student who wanted to be a movie star, the young rookie cop, the teacher in the toughest school you could find anywhere where there were shootings all over the place, and so people could root for them. This is a much more difficult thing for people to absorb because Kevin is not a person, once you see how, what kind of person he is, his good and his bad side, it's not a person who you naturally root for. He's not an American type. He's not an American character in the sense that you see a movie about a football player, it's black football player adopted by a white family, or you see Mr. T, or you see the menacing but smiling character. No, Kevin is a much more complicated and nuanced type, and not one you easily root for. And so the reaction to it has been not as enthusiastic as it was for the Ville. And but the other thing is, as I was writing the book, I just let things happen. You know, a journalist can always rig the story by choosing incidents that fulfill his agenda. From the very beginning, I was just going to write what I saw. And when you write what you see, it has one good thing, it's authentic. The prison scenes, the family scenes, the scenes of Kevin at home, the domestic scenes, are perfectly real. On the other hand, they don't follow an inspirational pattern. And when people don't feel uplifted by what they're reading, even though that uplifting in some ways is a fake.
Yeah, no, my personal reaction was exactly that this guy was too mixed a character for me to really get my hands around, and so alien that I couldn't get it. And I have to tell you, I didn't like the guy. I mean, lock them up and throw away the key could be one reaction to this book.
I think that's been some of the reaction to I've been on kind of right-wing talk radio, and that's what they're saying. But I say, let's, instead of, the value of me picking a totally, a person who people would admire, and then show how difficult it is for him to integrate. Well, then you'd have an inspirational story and everyone could love it. Instead, this is the truth. This is the kind of guy that you get. He's mixed. He's a mixed bag of things. And you may not like him. You may not like everything that he stands for. But let's say you do say that he's emerging into society. So it behooves all of us to take a look at his experiences, both in a really rough neighborhood and in prison, and try to alter the arc of his life by changing some of the experiences he's been through societally.
Okay, thank you. It's always good to see you. My thanks to Greg Donaldson, John J. Professor, and author of ZebraTown and the Ville for being on the show. See you next week when I talk to Fyodor DeRosa and Jen Senko, co-directors of the documentary The Vanishing City. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.